And here we are. Welcome back to the Red Shirt Sophomore, where we never sit out. Chris Dawson here to talk about a historic Big Ten Media Days. What a week it was in Indianapolis, right? The Big Ten has so many storylines, so many new faces. Obviously, you've got your high level programs, but there's a lot of parity in that middle. I cannot wait to get into it. Thank you guys for watching. Obviously, like we always say, if you like the content, like the video. We really appreciate it. We work very hard here. A like goes a long way. Same with a subscribe, right? I hope you guys are going to be here for the long run. We got a lot of stuff to talk about in August and also in the season. So we're just getting started here. So we hope you guys stick around with us. Yeah, so I'll just get into them. We can be talking about a couple different coaches and just kind of what their vibes were. A couple things that I heard that really caught my eye. And yeah, so to get into it, Dan Lanning. First of all, what an impressive human, right? I just love listening to him talk. The way he goes about his culture, like you could tell he was brought up right, and also in the coaching world. I mean, he listened, some very, very good coaches. You mentioned Nick Saban, Kirby Smart. Obviously, he's doing his own thing there at Oregon. This is a guy that knows how to run a program. I mean, I could see the way why he recruits so well. I mean, obviously they have, the resources there to recruit at a high level, but the way he just commands a microphone, right? I was listening on every single word. It was incredible, right? I'm really excited to see what they can do this year, and he is too. And the interesting thing he said was they finally feel good about their depth in the trenches. I don't think people realize he's only been there for 2 years. This is his third season. So he's not been there long. They've kind of had to stitch together some things. Now, obviously, Mario Cristobal was a fantastic recruiter, and he left them some really good pieces, right? But Dan Lanning has a certain way he wants to run the program on the offensive and defensive line. And I think they finally feel good about that, where they can really, really practice. And to me, that's kind of crazy that they haven't felt like that. And I don't know if this is just coach speak or this is just, whatever it may be. It's July and he's just, pulling things out of his butt. But I don't know. To me, that's a really good sign about this program. And obviously, holy cow, they have recruited so, so well on that offensive and defensive lines, making it, an absolute point of intention of them to really be able to take that next step as they're going in the Big Ten. All right, next coach I'll talk about Kirk Ferentz in Iowa. First of all, he's kind of interesting because I think he's an interesting, stereotype around him, right? His reputation, I feel like he's kind of funny, right? I really enjoyed listening to him talk. He was pretty honest though. The one thing I was listening to, and a lot of coaches, when you talk about retirement or coaches that are close to retirement, like obviously, Utah, Cal Whittingham comes up, a couple other guys. But Kirk Ferentz mentioned it. He was like he was getting worn out. He was tired of the way that things were moving. And a couple years ago, he was really, really close to just calling it quits. And to me, that would be really shocking. And even though he's been there forever and he's obviously getting on the older side, but to me, that was like, wow. I can't imagine Iowa without a guy like Kirk Ferentz there running the program, which would be interesting. And we'll see. Obviously, Iowa's had success and they've got good infrastructure in place there, and obviously the culture and the program tradition, very, very good. But it would be interesting to see what happens, ultimately once he does decide to move on and who they can bring in, what kind of talent that they can really elevate to, and specifically improving that offense. And Kirk Ferentz mentioned that too. Obviously, everyone's looking at that offense, see if they can get any better. He mentioned Cade McNamara and Brendan Sullivan and all these guys that were going to be competing for the job. It sounds like Cade's probably going to win that if he's healthy, but I do think you're in a much better situation with your backup being Brendan Sullivan as opposed to Deacon Hill. So moving on to USC's Lincoln Riley, obviously a new face to the Big Ten. USC coming in over from the Pac-12, and Lincoln Riley said something I think caught a lot of people off guard nationally as well. He talked about how they're still playing catch up at USC, and this is again like Dan Lynn, this is going to the year 3 at USC. And to me, some people are, like, maybe he's moving the goalpost, making excuses, but I do think the reality it kind of is there. Being in California, being in LA, everything's, your cost of living more expensive, your taxes are, a little bit higher. So like $100,000, to this person is a lot different coming from USC than it is coming from a different school, maybe with less income tax, maybe a school in Texas or Georgia, whatever it may be. But I do think there also needs certain infrastructure things to take place there that they're just kind of working on getting there. Lincoln Riley's finally figured it out, starting with that staff, but also, moving higher up in the athletic department, the presidents and everything else like that. I mean, you've seen that in this cycle, right? In the 2025 cycle, they started off hot when Dan Tomlin got there. They were cruising. They got 5 stars, four highly, highly rated, four top 100 players on the defensive side of the ball, and all of them have decommitted, right? And there's 5 total in that class that decommitted. But obviously, Justice Terry, Isaiah Gibson, those are the 2 headliners. 5-star defensive linemen from Georgia, freak athletes in their own right. They're really good players, and obviously USC just couldn't hold on to them for whatever reason it was. It could be a number of reasons. I think money had something to do with it for sure, but also just culture and sustainability and defense too, right? If you're from the state of Georgia, growing up in the Southeast, there's a lot of programs driving distance that are really good at developing defensive linemen. And then 2 other guys, right? 2 other safeties, top 100 players in this country as well. Anquan Fegans and Hilton Stubbs. Those are 2 guys from the Southeast area as well. Very, very good athletes as well. And then Jet White, 6'2", 170-pound athlete from Miami, also gone. And you're also seeing them just struggle to land talent in the first place too, especially even in that state of California. They're getting rated right now. The top, USC has one of the top 15 committed players, and that one is linebacker Maitai Tagoai, right? And Alabama, you've got A&M, Penn State, Oregon, Washington, all teams that are having success in your state. And while you only got one of those guys, to me, that's something definitely going to be keeping in my eye on, right? In this cycle and the next cycle as well, as Lincoln Riley continues to try to build that culture, bring back momentum to USC that he had there seemingly just two years ago, right? So that'll be interesting. Staying in the state of California, staying in the city of Los Angeles. Let's go to UCLA and Deshaun Foster. What an introduction to the Big Ten, wasn't that? I mean, that was a wild intro. If you haven't seen that, it is tough to watch, man. It was hilarious, but also like super awkward. Obviously, he either didn't have anything prepared or just froze up on stage. If you haven't seen it, obviously, once this video's done and you've liked and subscribed and shared this video to your friends, make sure you go check that out because I can't do it justice, right, by just talking about it. You have to go listen to it. But let's be honest, like he was not hired to win press conference. He was hired to win games, right? This is a little concerning, right? Because you wanted to make a good impression. You're going to the Big Ten. UCLA is a lot of turmoil nationally right now. The whole reputation and, the outside looking in on USC as a program is not a very, glamorous sight to see. And this is an opportunity for them that they could have flipped that, right? And started to build momentum on the recruiting trail. And that was obviously just a whiffed opportunity. But the reality is, like I said, he was not hired to win press conference. He was hired to win ball games. His players love him, right? Moving on to another guy that his players love, another guy that actually does win press conference. That's PJ Fleck, right? He always wins the podium. He is a guy, very energetic, very well spoken. As a Minnesota fan myself, right? You see that back there. I love listening to him speak. It's sometimes hard to trust because he loves to look on the positive things. He's got his row to boat thing, and I love it. And the culture is amazing there. It really is. But to be honest, I was really interested in talking about Minnesota and listening to a guy, Max Brosmer, talk. He's a guy not many people know about. This is a quarterback coming over from FCS New Hampshire, and he's going to be their starting quarterback this year. He was, obviously invited, brought along to Big Ten Media Days along with PJ Fleck. He's a really impressive guy. He's a veteran kid, right? Very, very smartly, 4.0 student, kinesiology major. Going to do some great things after football life is over. But I mean, football life, he's really good. He's going to elevate that offense, right? He's a leader. That's all you've heard coming out of spring and summer camp from the Minnesota players, from the coaching staff, from the beat writers, everything in there. He's got enough talent to really make them win football games and bring, some kind of passing, efficiency back to Minnesota and complement a pretty darn good running game. Moving on to Jedd Fisch in Arizona, right? I'm sorry. Wow, not Arizona. Oh my gosh. Washington. See, just crazy. So much transition here. Washington coming over to the Big Ten. Jedd Fisch coming over from Arizona to Washington and out to the Big Ten. Pretty crazy transition it was for him because he obviously was part of the domino that was Nick Saban and then Kalen DeBoer heading over to Alabama. Obviously, Jedd Fisch goes over to Washington, and that's where he's at right now. He talked about how they only have like 30-some guys are still left from last year team that was really, really talented, right? They obviously national championship runner-ups, right? A ton of first round picks, almost double digit draft picks. Holy cow. And a lot of those guys were, Jimmy Lake and the previous staffs at Washington's talent, but also DeBoer did a good job of, getting the best out of those guys and maximizing their talent and potential. And that coaching staff was really, really good. And you saw, the potential of a program like Washington, right? And I think Jedd Fisch was attracted to that. He understands that as well. Washington has had a lot of success um, for years now in the Pac-12 as well. So going back to even Chris Peterson, right? So he talked about this transition, a couple transitions, right? So I want to talk about Steve Belichick, right? He's going to be the defense coordinator for Washington now. He's coming over from the NFL, obviously, with the Patriots and Bill for a long time. He's coming to college, and he talked about how like that transition for Belichick, I think, took a little bit, right? And to be expected, right? Because you're used to dealing with NFL guys, and you get down not only to a college team, but a college team with a lot of transition and a lot of moving pieces and just guys trying to figure out systems. But he was impressed with the development, right? With the change that you saw and the improvement that was, from the first part of spring practice, the end of spring practice, all the way to summer workouts, and what they can do, into this season. He also talked about how, he's got a different mentality here as it was opposed to Arizona, and now he's at Washington. He talked about how at Arizona they had to train guys how not to lose, right? And then he had, you'd eventually build your way up, and now they flashed last year going 9-3 in the regular season, 10-3 with that bowl game win. But now he's at Washington. This is a Washington team that knows how to win, right? You saw last 2 years they won what 23 games, 24 games. I mean, holy cow. DeBoer had those guys cooking, and Jedd Fisch comes in, and now these guys aren't those guys that were actually producing results on the field, but they were around that locker room, around that culture. So he was able to talk about how there is that winning culture already instilled there. It's just about him to add and develop with that too, bringing over some guys from Arizona as well who have figured out how to win, and now you can merge that with the experience, the winning experience and winning culture of the Washington players. That should be fun there. He also talked about how, the Will Rogers scenario was crazy because, he's obviously the quarterback that's going to be competing for a spot, I guess probably going to win that spot for Washington. But when Jedd Fisch came over to Washington, there were thoughts of their quarterback, Noah Fifita, coming over to Washington from Arizona and following Jedd Fisch. Turns out he stayed out of Arizona. And then you bring in a guy like Will Rogers. I think it was kind of just like we'll wait and see if we get Fifita, then we can bring Rogers back, because Rogers was committed to DeBoer and staff beforehand. He was at the national championship throwing around with those guys pregame. Kind of wild to see, but regardless, he's still in Washington now. Gives him a nice presence, a veteran presence, a guy that's been in multiple systems. He was with Leach for a little bit, and then last year he ran, Zach Arnett's, trying to do that pro style offense, and I think he's going to run a little bit similar to a more pro style, maybe a spread pro style with Jedd Fisch there. Moving on to Kirk Cignetti in Indiana, he made waves back when he was hired, talking about he didn't want to just beat Purdue, he wanted to beat Ohio State and Michigan, and while that's obviously the goal, but I don't know if it's pretty realistic, especially early on. But he's an impressive guy. I listened to him talk, and I was really impressed. I think no surprise that he has had success everywhere he's been. Obviously with James Madison, most recently, really intrigued by his team. I think he talked about Curtis Rourke and what he brings as a veteran stability to that team. He talked about the development of those guys behind him, the wide receiver core. Obviously, they're bringing in a bunch of talent from JMU, but also he mentioned how they're bringing in talent, or more so experience and production from lower levels, and he thinks that they're still going to be able to translate well to Indiana. I also mentioned his staff, which I really like his staff as well. He did a damn good job assembling that, bringing some guys from JMU and sprinkling here and there with other very, very good pieces. A couple more to do here. Moving over to the former the Big Ten West in Wisconsin. We'll talk about Luke Fickell there. He talked about how they can adjust from year 1 to year 2 and how that's always learning curve, right? He was kind of hoping that they would learn from their experiences at Cincinnati. When he took over Cincinnati, they had obviously, it was taking over for a good program, but also, they had a learning curve there. They had a lot of things to learn as a staff, what you can do right, what you did wrong, blah, blah, blah. He mentioned how he was determined not to let that happen in Wisconsin, but Wisconsin brought its own set of problems as well. And so he kind of was spent the year fixing that as well. He feels like he's got them in a good program. That their schedule is brutal. He mentioned how he didn't even look at his schedule for a while because he didn't want to look at it, which is funny. Obviously, he's joking about that, but I think they've got a lot of opportunity. I'm sure he's excited about that. He was also asked about the expansion of the scholarship limits or the getting rid of walk-ons, and he wanted walk-ons to stay. He thought it was a great opportunity for 18 to 22-year-olds to fulfill a lifelong dream to be part of a college football program, and I'm all with that too. I think that's also fantastic. He liked the 105, on the smaller end, and then trying to keep walk-ons, but others had significantly higher numbers, which is kind of crazy to think, scary to think about. Sounds like it's going to be close to that 105, but without walk-ons. But we'll see once that comes finalized. I was also asked a little bit more fun question. It was talking about the toughest coaches to scheme against, right? Or toughest schemes to play against from these coaches. And that's not just like, Ryan Day or like these elite, obviously, coaches. We want to talk about some little lesser known coaches. And he brought up a couple of really nice names. The first one was Scott Frost, right, at UCF. And to me, that was crazy because if you're a Big Ten fan watching this, you remember Scott Frost as a guy who really struggled at Nebraska. But go back to his days at UCF playing against Luke Fickell in Cincinnati. They really gave them fits. And he was obviously really successful there. Part of the reason why he got that job at Nebraska, along with big payday. And it was cool to see that because, even the guys interviewing on the panel were like, that's awesome. I would not have expected that, but that's why we asked that question. Another guy I mentioned was Kevin Wilson from Tulsa. He talked about how that was a guy that deserves a ton of credit down there. He's kind of been everywhere. He's at Oklahoma, I think, and a couple other places that had some crossover with Fickell. He mentioned Mike Norvell back when he was at Memphis, right? Also in the American Conference when he was at Cincinnati, or when Fickell was at Cincinnati, excuse me, and how he was obviously, just very impressive, especially running the football. Holy cow. And then he mentioned Dan Lanning just because they kind of asked him. Basically, he mentioned Dan Lanning, but back at Georgia. And he was like, that Georgia scheme, because they played him in that bowl game. I believe it was 2020, I want to say. And it was just, holy cow. They were like, they had no chance in that game. And not only were they outmatched physically, but he said Dan Lanning and his schemes were incredible, which is obviously good if you're an Oregon fan to hear that, watching the Big Ten. And the last coach I'll talk about here is Matt Rhule in Nebraska. They've had an exciting offseason, and I think he understands that. You could tell how excited he was about this year's team. First of all, he's another guy like Dan Lanning. I like a lot of these guys on this list too, but he's another guy that I just love listening to him talk. I mean, I'm not a Nebraska fan, right? I'm a Minnesota fan. I don't particularly like Nebraska, but if I had a kid and he was looking to be recruited by these big time programs, I would absolutely send my kid to Matt Rhule and play for him because he just says all the right things. I think he really cares about football. And not that these guys don't, but Matt Rhule is just amazing. I really like him. I think he's going to do great things in Nebraska. But he talked about how they're still flying under the radar, and he loved that spot to be because let's be honest, like, yes, they're gaining momentum, but they're still really, really hungry. They haven't been to a bowl game in a long time. He said like 7, 8 years. Like, that's crazy. And there's no reason to get ahead of themselves. They still have a lot to prove. But he also mentioned how this trip to Nebraska was different than maybe Temple or Baylor. He talked about how quickly the players bought in, right? And to me, when I hear that, I'm like, yeah, because you're Matt freaking Rhule. You had huge success at Temple, huge success at Baylor. You went to the NFL. You come to Nebraska with a lot of hype. Like, of course, they're going to buy into you. And I think that's kind of speeding up their timeline because at Baylor, at Temple, they struggled in years 1 and 2, and then in year 3 they popped, right? I think Matt Rhule was like, let's just skip year 1, right? Let's go right to year 2 and year 3 and get this train rolling. And I think they're obviously a team. There are a lot of people's underdog in terms of flying on the radar in the Big Ten. They've got a manageable schedule. They've got a lot of talent, good coaching staff, young, exciting quarterback, and they can do some fun things. But yeah, that's it for the Big Ten media days. I hope you really enjoyed. Obviously, let me know if I missed anything or if you heard something else. Obviously, we love to interact with you guys in the comments. Like I said, if you haven't liked and subscribed already, what are you doing? Get that done right now. Make sure to share this video with others as well, the Big Ten fans or other fans of other conferences that need to know what these Big Ten coaches said in media days. And hope you guys stick around We're doing our conference previews right now. We are working tirelessly on those. We cannot wait to get those out for you guys. But until then, we'll see you guys in the next one.